It is August 23rd, 1944. The sun over the Falaise pocket is a blinding, indifferent eye, peering through a haze of pulverized limestone and the oily black smoke of burning tiger tanks. The air does not move. It stagnates, thick with the smell of scorched rubber, cordite, and the sweet, rot-heavy stench of horses that did not survive the Allied fighter bombers. Obergefreiter Kurt Steiner stands by a dusty roadside near Argentan, his throat a desert of dry grit, his uniform a stiff, salt-crusted shell of field grey. His hands are raised, but his eyes are fixed on the ground, watching the rhythmic vibration of the earth. It is not the tremor of an earthquake. It is the steady, thundering pulse of the Red Ball Express, a column of General Motors trucks that stretches toward the horizon, an unbroken chain of steel moving 12,500 tons of supplies every single day. Steiner has spent 3 years on the Eastern Front, where the geography of war was measured in frozen kilometers and the gnawing absence of bread. He is a veteran of the arithmetic of scarcity, a world where a single bowl of watery cabbage soup was a victory and a handful of sawdust-filled black bread was a feast. He expects the end now. He expects the rough hands of a captor, the bark of a final command, or at the very least, the hollow ache of a prison hunger that he has known since the Dnieper. However, the reality that greets him is a visceral material shock that his mind cannot immediately process. A young American corporal, barely 20 years old, leans against the fender of a jeep that looks as though it rolled off an assembly line 3 days ago. The American is not gaunt, he is not desperate. He is whistling a tune that Steiner does not recognize, and in his hand he holds a small rectangular brick wrapped in shimmering silver foil and dark brown paper. With a casual flick of the wrist, the American tosses the brick to Steiner. It is a Hershey bar. Steiner catches it, the weight of it surprising him. It is heavy, dense with a kind of concentrated energy he has not felt in years. He peels back the silver foil, and the scent hits him, not the chemical bitter aroma of the ersatz chocolate found in German rations, diluted with coal tar and vegetable fats, but the rich, overpowering perfume of real cocoa, real milk, and massive quantities of sugar. He breaks a square, the snap of the tempered chocolate sounding like a pistol shot in the quiet of his own disbelief. As the sugar hits his tongue, Steiner experiences a tectonic shift in his understanding of the war. This is not merely a confection. This is a weapon of industrial arithmetic. He realizes, in a moment of agonizing clarity, that the nation he is fighting does not just have more bullets. They have so much surplus, so much terrifying abundance, that they can afford to give their enemies the luxuries that the German High Command cannot even provide to its elite panzer divisions. The American corporal then pulls a pack of Lucky Strikes from his pocket, taps out a cigarette, and offers it to Steiner. The tobacco is white, blonde, and perfectly cured. It is not the dry floor sweepings of the continent. As the first cloud of smoke fills Steiner's lungs, he looks past the corporal at the endless line of trucks, the sky filled with the droning roar of C-47s, and the stacks of silver-wrapped bars piled carelessly in the back of the jeep. This is the start of the calamity. Steiner, who was told that the American arsenal of democracy was a Jewish bluff and a capitalist fantasy, is now staring at the physical proof of his own systematic annihilation. He is not being defeated by a better soldier, he is being crushed by a society that treats 600-calorie chocolate bars as a baseline logistical requirement. The mathematics of defeat are written in the silver foil discarded in the French mud. Behind Steiner, thousands of his countrymen are being herded into assembly areas. They are hollow-cheeked, their eyes wide with the smirk of the defeated turning into the blank stare of the overwhelmed. They watch as GIS crack open crates of Coca-Cola, the glass bottles clinking with a musicality that seems obscene in a zone of death. They see soldiers eating canned peaches, white bread that feels like clouds between their fingers, and cigarettes smoked halfway and tossed aside with a casualness that suggests an infinite supply. In his pocket, Steiner's hand closes around a letter he wrote to his wife, Maria, 3 weeks ago. In it, he spoke of the final victory and the will of the Führer that would surely stem the tide. Now the letter feels like a relic from a delusional age. The industrial infinity of the United States has arrived, not just in the form of the 120mm gun, the final argument of the battlefield, but in the form of a 1.5-ounce bar of chocolate. This is the ideological collapse. The master race is standing in the dust, being fed by the decadent democracy they were told was on the verge of ruin. Steiner looks at the American corporal, who is now opening a second Hershey bar for himself. The American does not look at Steiner as a monster or even a particularly formidable foe. He looks at him with a kind of pitying curiosity, as one might look at a prehistoric animal that has stumbled into a modern city. The thunder of the Allied advance continues, a rhythmic, mechanical roar that never stops, never falters, and never runs out of fuel. The sky belongs to America, and the earth is being paved with their surplus. The invasion they had promised to throw back had instead swept them away. The column moves. It is a serpentine beast of field grey wool and limping boots, winding through the shattered remains of Cherbourg. The air here is sharp with the Atlantic salt, but it is overwritten by the heavy, cloying scent of diesel and the metallic tang of the harbour's reconstruction. For Obergefreiter Steiner and the thousands of others funneled into the concrete moors of the docks, the sight is a physical blow to their remaining resolve. They were told the Atlantic wall was impregnable, a tectonic barrier of steel and will. Instead, they see it repurposed as a massive conveyor belt. They are herded toward the looming silhouettes of Liberty ships, vessels the German propaganda ministry had dismissed as rust buckets and sitting ducks for the grey wolves of the U-boat arm. But as Steiner climbs the gangplank, he looks out at the horizon. He does not see a lonely, hunted transport. He sees a constellation of masts, a floating metropolis of 10, 20, 50 ships, all riding low in the water, guarded by destroyers that dash through the waves with a predatory, effortless grace. This is the Great Migration. It is the industrial arithmetic of the Atlantic Bridge. While the Reich struggled to move a single division across the mud of the Eastern Front, the Americans are moving an entire civilization across 3,000 miles of ocean. The macro perspective is staggering. By the end of the war, nearly 380,000 German prisoners will be transported to the American mainland. This is not a tactical maneuver, it is a logistical miracle. Inside the hold of the ship, the micro perspective takes over. The air is warm, humming with the deep, rhythmic throb of massive oil-burning turbines. There is no smell of damp straw or the sour odor of unwashed bodies that defined the barracks in Poland. Instead, there is the antiseptic sting of bleach and the intoxicating, impossible scent of roasting coffee. Steiner sits on a bunk, a real mattress suspended by chains, and watches as a steward walks through the hold. The man is carrying a tray of white bread. To the German soldier, bread is the Kommissbrot, a dark, dense, often sawdust extended brick designed for survival, not pleasure. But this bread is different. It is bleached, aerated, and impossibly soft. It feels like a sponge in Steiner's hand. When he bites into it, the arithmetic of abundance strikes again. It is sweet. It is fueled by a sugar industry that spans from the Caribbean to the Great Plains, a resource the blockade-strangled Reich has not seen in years. A ghost speaks in the corner of the hold. Gunther, a young radio operator from Hamburg, his eyes sunken and reflecting the dim red glow of the overhead lights, whispers in a dry rasp. "My father wrote to me in July," he says. "He said they are eating tulip bulbs in the city. He said the sky is black with their bombers every day, and the earth never stops shaking. He told me to hold on, that the U-boats would starve the English into submission." Gunther looks at the white bread in his hand, then out through a small porthole at the endless, unmolested convoy. He says he lied, or he was lied to. The ocean is full of them. There are more ships here than there are trees in the Black Forest. The mathematics of defeat are inescapable here. Every revolution of the ship's propellers is a testament to an industrial infinity. The Liberty ship Steiner stands upon was built in less than 30 days. In the time it took for a German factory to handcraft a single Tiger tank, the American shipyards at Richmond and South Portland were launching 3 of these steel giants. It is a systematic annihilation of the German concept of qualitative superiority. The Americans do not care if their ships are beautiful, they care that they are many. As the ship plunges into the deep swells of the mid-Atlantic, the prisoners wait for the shudder, the catastrophic impact of a torpedo that would signal the German Navy's relevance. It never comes. The silence of the U-boats is the most terrifying sound Steiner has ever heard. It means the grey wolves have been hunted to near extinction by a battlefield network of sonar, escort carriers, and long-range Liberator bombers. The Atlantic is no longer a moat, it is a highway. On the 3rd day at sea, the mathematics take a visceral form. The prisoners are led to the mess hall for a midday meal. The menu is a material shock. Thick slices of ham glazed in syrup, mounds of mashed potatoes enriched with real butter, and green beans that look as though they were picked yesterday. This is the 4,000-calorie industrial standard. It is more energy in a single sitting than Steiner was often allotted for an entire week of combat in the Ardennes. He watches his comrades. The smirk of the ideological warrior is gone, replaced by a haunting, silent collapse. They eat with a frantic, desperate intensity, but their eyes remain fixed on the Americans serving the food. The American soldiers are relaxed. They joke about baseball and movies. They do not look like men who are strained by the effort of war. They look like men who are on a well-provisioned excursion. The realization settles into Steiner's marrow like the Atlantic cold. The war was never a contest of wills. It was a contest of calories, octanes, and steel plate thickness. And the Americans have already won the arithmetic. The silence of the Atlantic night is broken only by the hum of the ship's electronics, nodes in the world's first global logistical web. Steiner lies in his bunk, the silver wrapper of a Hershey bar, saved from his capture, tucked into his pocket like a dark talisman. He knows now that they are not going to a prison. They are being invited to witness the funeral of their own hubris. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America. It is September 12th, 1944. The mist over the North Atlantic begins to fray, torn apart by a morning sun that feels too bright, too clinical for men who have spent years living in the bruised purple shadows of a continent under siege. Steiner stands on the deck of the transport ship, his fingers gripped so tightly around the cold iron railing that the knuckles are bone white. He expects to see a coastline scarred by craters, a jagged tooth of concrete bunkers, and the nervous flicker of searchlights. He expects to see a nation on its knees, gasping under the same attritional reality that has hollowed out Berlin and turned Hamburg into a landscape of scorched brick. Instead, the horizon rises to meet him as a glittering, vertical impossible. This is the port of New York. It is a tectonic shift in Steiner's perception of space and power. He sees the skyscrapers of Manhattan, those cathedrals of commerce, rising into a sky that is not patrolled by the Luftwaffe, because the Luftwaffe no longer exists as a coherent force. There is no smoke here, there are no ruins, there is only the constellation of electricity that Steiner knows will blaze with a defiant, terrifying brilliance the moment the sun sets. The macro perspective of this single harbor is a death sentence for the Third Reich. The port of New York is not just a dock, it is a gargantuan hydraulic pump circulating the lifeblood of the Allied war machine. At its peak, this single stretch of shoreline is moving nearly 50% of all American men and materials sent overseas. Steiner watches tugboats, stout, powerful engines wrapped in oakum, dance around the Liberty ships like pilot fish. The industrial arithmetic is visible in the sheer volume of cranes, the miles of railway tracks hugging the piers, and the mountains of pyramids of jerry cans stacked on the wharves. It is a spectacle of industrial infinity that makes the Atlantic Wall look like a child's sandbox. The micro perspective is the sound of the city itself. It is a low, persistent thrum, the hum of electronics, the distant roar of thousands of automobiles, and the rhythmic clanging of a society that has never known the silence of ruins. Steiner looks at the face of a fellow prisoner, a veteran sergeant named Hasso, who survived the meat grinder of the Volkhov swamps. Hasso is weeping, but there is no sound to his grief. He is staring at the Statue of Liberty. Hasso whispers that they told them they were starving, his voice thick with a sudden, crushing ideological collapse. He says they told them their cities were being burned. But look at the glass. There is not a single window broken, not one. This is the material shock of the unblackened horizon. In Europe, light is a death sentence. It invites the bombers. Here, light is a commodity. As the ship moves closer to the pier, Steiner sees the miracle of the opposition in its most mundane form, a parking lot. Hundreds of private civilian cars are parked near the docks. To a German soldier who saw the Wehrmacht's mobility die when the last of the horses were eaten in the ruins of Stalingrad, the sight of 1,000 functional internal combustion engines sitting idle is a visceral blow. It is the mythology of abundance made manifest. However, the true horror for Steiner is the realization of his own insignificance. He had been told he was part of a master race, a warrior of destiny. But as he gazes at the New York skyline, he realizes he is merely a statistical rounding error in the American ledger. The mathematics of defeat are written in the sheer scale of the architecture. A nation that can build these towers during a global war is a nation that cannot be stopped by tactical brilliance or the will of a dictator. The ship moors with a heavy, final thud against the wooden pilings of the pier. The smell of the city wafts over the deck, a cocktail of roasted peanuts, gasoline, and the ozone of the subway vents. It is the smell of a world that is not only winning the war, but is already planning for the peace. Steiner is led down the gangplank, and for the first time, he feels the frozen soil of his memories begin to thaw into a terrifying new reality. He is no longer a soldier. He is a guest of the arsenal of democracy, and the first thing he is handed upon reaching American soil is not a set of shackles, but a fresh, chilled bottle of Coca-Cola. The condensation on the glass is a glow of the HUD in a new kind of war, one where the weapon of choice is a surplus of sugar and ice. He looks at the dark, bubbling liquid and the red and white logo. It is a symbol of a society that produces a bomber every 63 minutes and still has the industrial capacity to bottle a dream. The invasion they had promised to throw back had instead swept them away. The train car is a sweltering steel box, vibrating with the rhythmic, hypnotic clatter of wheels against a rail gauge that seems to stretch into infinity. It is September 1944. And Obergefreiter Steiner is staring through the slit of a cattle car, but he is not seeing the ruined, scorched earth of the East. He is witnessing the mathematics of space. For 3 days, the train has hurtled across the American Midwest, passing through an endless golden ocean of corn and wheat that ripples under a sun that has never seen a Heinkel bomber. This is the heart of the arsenal of democracy, a landscape where the horizon is not a front line, but a factory. The train slows, hissing steam into the dry air of the Texas plains as it pulls into Camp Hearn. Steiner and his comrades are marched toward the mess hall, their boots kicking up a fine alkaline dust. The air is heavy with a scent that causes Steiner's stomach to cramp with a sudden violent hunger, the smell of rendering fat, toasted grain, and the sharp, clean tang of citrus. Inside the mess hall, the industrial arithmetic of the American war effort is laid bare upon a stainless steel tray. This is the plate. Steiner stares at his portion. 2 eggs fried in real butter, 4 strips of thick-cut bacon, a mound of hash browns, and 3 slices of white bread so soft they seem like a culinary impossibility. Beside the plate sits a pint of fresh milk and a bowl of canned peaches in heavy syrup. In the Wehrmacht, the attritional reality meant that a soldier's daily caloric intake had plummeted to less than 2,000 calories, much of it derived from ersatz coffee made of roasted acorns and bread cut with sawdust to provide bulk. Here, the American Geneva Convention standard dictates a staggering 4,000 calories per day. The micro perspective is the fizzing of the fat on the bacon, the way the yellow yolk of the egg runs across the white porcelain, a visual material shock that Steiner's brain struggles to categorize. He remembers a diary entry from a friend, Hans, who died at the gates of Moscow. "We have eaten the last of the horses. The snow is our only soup." Steiner feels a surge of ideological collapse. He had been told the Americans were a soft, decadent people, yet their decadence allows them to feed their prisoners better than the Reich feeds its finest grenadiers. The macro perspective is even more devastating. This single plate is a node in a global agricultural engine that, in 1944, is producing 1.3 billion bushels of wheat and 3 billion bushels of corn. While the German rail network is being systematically dismantled by P-47 Thunderbolts, the American rail system is a frictionless conveyor belt. It is moving millions of tons of meat from Chicago, fruit from California, and dairy from Wisconsin, not just to its own 12 million soldiers, but to its enemies. The logistics of the plate are a weapon. The Americans are literally fattening up their captives to demonstrate the futility of resistance. A ghost haunts the table, the voice of a POW named Wilhelm, recorded in a later interrogation. "We looked at the meat and we looked at each other. We thought it was a trick, a last meal before the execution. But then the guards came back with seconds. They had so much food they were throwing the leftovers into the trash. That was the moment I knew. You cannot defeat a country that throws away more meat in a day than our division sees in a month." Steiner lifts the glass of milk. It is cold, chilled by an electrical grid that spans a continent. The mathematics are inescapable. Every calorie on this tray is a nail in the coffin of the Third Reich. The systematic annihilation of Steiner's world is being achieved not through the final argument of the 120mm gun, but through the terrifying surplus of the American farm. The smirk of the veteran soldier has vanished, replaced by the hollow realization that his sacrifice was not just tragic, but mathematically irrelevant. He bites into the white bread. It is sweet, fueled by an industrial sugar supply that Steiner's family in Essen has not tasted in 3 years. This is the mythology of abundance made visceral. As he eats, he hears the distant low drone of a training flight from a nearby airfield. The sound is constant, a reminder that the sky, like the soil, has been conquered by a logic Steiner cannot hope to understand. The invasion they had promised to throw back had instead swept them away. It is late October 1944, and the Texas sun has transitioned from a blinding eye to a heavy, oppressive weight that settles into the corrugated iron roofs of Camp Hearn. Inside the post exchange, the PX, the air is thick with a scent Steiner can only describe as the smell of peace. A dizzying mixture of floor wax, roasted peanuts, and the high sweet note of industrial sugar. Steiner stands in a line of men who have forgotten what it feels like to choose. In the Reich, every calorie was a political statement, a rationed fragment of a dying dream. Here, choice is an abundant, terrifying reality. He reaches the counter and looks at the display. It is a material shock delivered in small rectangular packages. There, stacked in pyramids that reflect the overhead lights, are the Hershey bars. To the American soldier, this is a D ration or a casual snack. To Steiner, it is a tectonic shift in the nature of warfare. He picks up a bar, the wrapper a deep sober maroon with the name Hershey's embossed in bold silver letters. It is not just candy, it is a 600-calorie fuel cell, a node in the world's first battlefield network of nutritional dominance. The micro perspective is the tactile sensation of the foil. Steiner peels it back, the silver paper crinkling with a sound that reminds him of the fizzing of the soda he had days before. The chocolate is dark, dense, and engineered for durability. It does not melt in the Texas heat because it was designed to withstand the humidity of the Pacific and the friction of a paratrooper's pocket. When he breaks a piece, the snap is clean, a testament to the industrial tempering of the cocoa butter. The taste is a visceral explosion, a concentrated hit of glucose and dairy that sends a jolt through his nervous system, a stark contrast to the Coca-Cola he was issued in the Ardennes, which was laced with caffeine and pervitin to mask the exhaustion of a starving army. However, the industrial arithmetic behind this single bar is what truly signals the calamity. While the German chocolate industry had been cannibalized for war production, with cocoa imports severed by the British blockade, the Hershey factory in Pennsylvania had been transformed into a titanic engine of caloric output. By 1944, the arsenal of democracy was producing over 24 million bars a week. This is the logistics of sugar. The Americans treat sugar not as a luxury, but as a strategic mineral, as essential as the high-octane fuel in their Mustang fighters or the steel in their Sherman tanks. A ghost speaks through the records of a captured German officer, Major von Luck, who later reflected on the American supply chain. He remembered seeing American prisoners eating chocolate and smoking cigarettes while we were searching for a crust of bread. It was then he realized that we were not just fighting an army, but a supermarket. They had the capacity to provide their men with the things we had not seen in 5 years. It was the arithmetic of infinity. Steiner looks at the mathematics of the PX. For a few cents of his labor allowance earned by picking cotton or working in the camp laundry, he can purchase a level of luxury that a German general could not command in the ruins of Berlin. This is the industrial logic of the United States, to win not through tactical brilliance, but by making the enemy's deprivation look like a choice. The American mythology of abundance is a weapon that shreds the ideological collapse of the POWs more effectively than any artillery barrage. They were told the Americans were a mongrel race, incapable of sacrifice. Yet here is the proof of a civilization so organized, so productive, that it can ship billions of chocolate bars across a U-boat-infested ocean just to keep its soldiers and its prisoners satiated. The mathematics of defeat are calculated in the sugar-to-blood ratio. Steiner realizes that every Hershey bar represents a cargo ship, every ship represents a shipyard, and every shipyard represents a nation that has not even begun to feel the strain of the conflict. The arithmetic is inescapable. Germany is a nation of ersatz, ersatz coffee, ersatz rubber, ersatz hope. America is a nation of infinity. He walks out of the PX, the sweet aftertaste of the chocolate still clinging to his palate. In the distance, the thundering roar of a freight train echoes across the prairie, carrying more crates of silver-wrapped bars, more barrels of sugar, more mounds of abundance. The sky is a vast, unblinking blue, and beneath it, the systematic annihilation of Steiner's world continues, one 600-calorie brick at a time. The silence of ruins awaits his homeland, but here, in the Texas dust, the air is filled with the scent of a victor who can afford to be generous. The invasion they had promised to throw back had instead swept them away. It is November 14th, 1944, 1900 hours. The Texas dusk is a bruised purple, cooling rapidly as the shadows of the barracks lengthen across the raked gravel of the compound. Steiner sits on the edge of his bunk, the air around him thick with a quiet, communal ritual. It is the smell of peace once more, but this time it is sharper, more aromatic, and deeply visceral. It is the scent of blonde, flu-cured tobacco, a scent that has become the unofficial currency of the camp. He strikes a match, the small flame illuminating a tectonic shift in his daily reality. In his hand is a pack of Lucky Strikes. The packaging is a crisp, clinical white, a change from the pre-war green, a sacrifice made to the industrial arithmetic of the war effort, as the chromium used in the green dye was diverted to harden the steel of tank transmissions. To Steiner, the pack is a material shock. In the Wehrmacht, a cigarette was a rare, jagged luxury, often an ersatz nightmare made of dried beech leaves, floor sweepings, and chemical additives designed to suppress hunger. Here, the cigarettes are precision-rolled delivery systems for industrial morale. The micro perspective is the sound of the cellophane being torn, a material the German war economy has long since abandoned for rough, recycled paper. Steiner taps the bottom of the pack, and a single, perfectly white cylinder slides out. It is uniform, unblemished, and stuffed with a blend of Virginia and Burley leaf that has traveled halfway across a continent to reach him. When he inhales, the smoke is not the harsh, throat-tearing rasp of the Eastern Front. It is smooth, sweet, and heavy with the mythology of abundance. However, the industrial logic behind this smoke is the true architect of Steiner's despair. While the German tobacco industry had collapsed under the weight of the British naval blockade, the American tobacco machine had reached a state of industrial infinity. In 1944 alone, the United States is producing over 300 billion cigarettes. This is not a production figure, it is a statistical bombardment. The mathematics of defeat are calculated in the sheer volume of these white tubes. For every one cigarette a German soldier might scrounge from a dead comrade, the American arsenal of democracy is churning out 10,000, packaged in moisture-proof crates and shipped to every corner of the globe. The macro perspective reveals the cigarette as a node in the world's first battlefield network. It is more than a smoke, it is a stabilization agent for the psyche. The Americans understand that a soldier who can smoke is a soldier who can endure. By providing these luxuries even to their prisoners, they are conducting a psychological autopsy on the German will. Steiner realizes that the ideological collapse of his countrymen is being accelerated by the realization that their captors treat their highest luxuries as common refuse. He sees GIS smoke half a cigarette and flick it into the dust, a gesture of waste that would be unthinkable in a starving Reich. A ghost haunts the barracks tonight, the voice of Unteroffizier Meyer, who had been a clerk in a tobacco warehouse in Dresden before the war. Meyer stares at the white smoke curling toward the ceiling and whispers, "In Dresden, we were told the Americans were rationing their tobacco to the point of rebellion." His voice trembles with a systematic annihilation of his previous beliefs. "But look at this," he says. "They give us a carton a week. A carton. My father hasn't seen a real cigar since 1941. We are fighting a nation that has so much tobacco, they are using it to buy our silence." The arithmetic of the camp economy is ruthless. A Hershey bar is worth 2 cigarettes. A letter home is worth 5. But the blonde tobacco is the gold standard. Steiner watches as a group of prisoners barters for a hand-carved wooden toy, the price being 3 Luckies. This is the calamity of the German soldier. He has entered an economy where the attritional reality of his homeland is replaced by a surplus he cannot comprehend. He is being defeated by the mathematics of the American supply chain, which treats the comfort of a prisoner of war with more logistical seriousness than the German High Command treated the winter clothing of the 6th Army. As the smoke fills Steiner's lungs, he feels the frozen soil of his memories once again. He remembers the silence of ruins in the towns he left behind, where the only thing to smoke was the charred remains of a history he once believed in. Here, the glow of the HUD in this new world is the cherry-red tip of a cigarette, burning with the fuel of an industrial giant that has not even broken a sweat. The smirk of the ideological warrior has been replaced by the blank, unblinking stare of a man who knows the war is over, regardless of what the radio from Berlin says. The industrial arithmetic is final. The tobacco is blonde, the supply is infinite, and the defeat is absolute. The invasion they had promised to throw back had instead swept them away. It is December 1944. The wind across the American interior is a sharp, clean blade, but it does not carry the scent of winter death that Steiner remembers from the Rzhev salient. Instead, it carries the resinous, heady aroma of fresh-cut yellow pine and the rhythmic, industrial heartbeat of 10,000 hammers. Steiner stands in the center of the parade ground at Camp Herne, looking out at a horizon dominated by the infrastructure of mercy. This is a tectonic shift in the history of captivity. While the Third Reich is cannibalizing its own cities for rubble to fill tank ditches, the United States is engaged in a gargantuan act of architectural creation. The macro perspective is a staggering display of industrial arithmetic. Between 1942 and 1945, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers constructs over 500 base camps and nearly 3,000 branch camps across 46 states. They are not building cages, they are building standardized, prefabricated cities for an army of ghosts. The micro perspective is the 700 series barracks. Steiner runs his hand along the wall of his hut. The wood is smooth, the joins are precise, and the tar paper roofing is intact. Each building is a node in a massive continental network of logistical precision. There is electricity in every barrack, a constant, unwavering glow of the HUD that provides light at the flick of a switch, a luxury that has become a memory in the blackened ruins of Essen. There are flush toilets, showers with reliable hot water, and sewage systems that handle the waste of 425,000 men with a clinical, systematic efficiency. This is the mathematics of defeat, rendered in timber and copper. Steiner, who once lived in a hole scraped into the frozen Ukrainian mud, now lives in a facility that is better engineered than the apartment block he inhabited in peacetime. The industrial logic is terrifying. The Americans do not build these camps with the frantic desperation of a nation under siege. They build them with the casual, overwhelming speed of an assembly line. A camp for 3,000 men rises from the scrub brush of Texas or the forests of Michigan in less than 60 days. It is the systematic annihilation of the German hope that the American war effort would be hamstrung by its own internal logistics. However, the true material shock is the absence of the silence of ruins. In Europe, every building is a target. Here, every building is a testament to an industrial infinity that has no end. Steiner watches a truck deliver a load of rolls of copper wire, precious strategic copper that the Reich is stripping from the steeples of its churches to make shell casings. Here, it is used to ensure that a German corporal can have a reading lamp by his bunk. A ghost speaks in the barracks tonight. Hans, a former civil engineer from Stuttgart, speaks in a hushed voice as he stares at the blueprints of the camp laundry they are being asked to maintain. They are not just housing us, Hans says, his eyes reflecting an ideological collapse. They are mocking us with their capacity. They have so much lumber, so much copper, so much steel, that they can afford to give us the Geneva Convention and 10%. My city is a pile of ash, and here, the Americans are worried about the ventilation in our latrines. This is the calamity of the German experience in America. The prisoners realize that the arsenal of democracy is so potent that it can treat the enemy as a guest without depleting a single resource from the front line. The arithmetic of the 500 camps proves that the Atlantic was never a barrier. It was a filter that allowed only the massive, the standardized, and the abundant to pass through. Steiner looks at the perimeter fence. It is made of high-quality galvanized steel, a material shock in itself. To the Americans, this is merely a boundary. To Steiner, it is a silver-wrapped cage of surplus. The attritional reality of his homeland, the starvation, the cold, the crumbling walls, is an ocean away, replaced by an infrastructure that is as relentless as a heartbeat. The smirk of the soldier is long gone, buried under the weight of 500 cities built for a defeated race. The invasion they had promised to throw back had instead swept them away. It is December 24th, 1944. The air in the barracks is still, heavy with the scent of the pine boughs the men have gathered from the camp perimeter and the faint, lingering aroma of the roast turkey dinner they were served only hours ago. It is Christmas Eve, and for Obergefreiter Steiner, the silence is a physical weight. He sits under the glow of HUD provided by a single electric bulb, a pen in his hand, and a sheet of crisp white paper before him. This is the moment of the ghost voices, where the mathematics of defeat is translated into the intimate language of the family. Steiner is writing to Maria in Essen. In his mind he sees her in the cellar, the silence of ruins punctuated only by the distant rhythmic thud of the Royal Air Force earthquake bombs. He knows that for her, the Christmas meal was a thin soup of potato peelings and a shared piece of black bread. He looks at his own hands. They are no longer the blackened fingers of the front. They are clean, well-fed, and steady. The paradox is a visceral, material shock. He is a prisoner, yet he is living in a state of luxury that his family can no longer imagine. He writes to her, "I ate turkey today, Maria. Real meat, white bread. I have a bar of chocolate in my pocket for later. Do not worry about me. The Americans have everything. They have so much that they do not even count the calories they give us." As he writes, he realizes the ideological collapse this letter will cause. If it reaches her, it will be a calamity of truth. It will tell her that the systematic annihilation of Germany is not just a military event, but an industrial one. The macro perspective of the Postal Service is a miracle of industrial arithmetic. Steiner's letter will be collected by a guard, processed through the International Red Cross, and moved across the Atlantic by a logistical network that never sleeps. While the German Reichsbahn is being shredded into metal confetti by P-47s, the American mail system is a node in the world's first battlefield network, ensuring that the voices of the defeated are carried home to haunt the survivors. By 1944, millions of these ghost letters are flowing out of 500 camps, each one a psychological depth charge. A ghost from a neighboring bunk, a veteran named Klaus, speaks without looking up from his own letter. Klaus says he told his mother about the ice cream. He tells her they get it twice a week. She will not believe him. She will think the Americans forced him to write it. Then he tells her about the shoes. "I have new boots, Maria. They are made of real leather, not the cardboard ersatz we were issued in Poland." This is the mathematics of the soul. The realization is that the enemy is not just better armed, but fundamentally more capable of sustaining life itself. Steiner pauses, his eyes tracking a moth circling the light bulb. The industrial logic of his situation is inescapable. The arsenal of democracy is so vast that it can afford the paper, the ink, the fuel, and the manpower to let 400,000 enemies tell their families exactly how well they are being treated. It is the ultimate psychological autopsy. Every letter home is a confession of the mythology of abundance. It tells the starving population of Germany that the war is not a stalemate, but a calamity of arithmetic. In the distance, a group of prisoners begins to sing Stille Nacht. Their voices are clear, bolstered by diets of 4,000 calories and the fizzing comfort of the PX. But Steiner can only think of the arithmetic of scarcity waiting for his letter in the ruins of Essen. He realizes that he is a ghost to Maria, and she is a ghost to him, separated by an ocean of surplus that Germany can never cross. The smirk of the ideological warrior is replaced by a quiet, devastating grief for a nation that chose will over arithmetic. He folds the paper, the material shock of its cleanliness still surprising him. He knows that when Maria reads this, she will finally understand the tectonic shift that has occurred. The mathematics have spoken. Germany is a landscape of frozen soil and silence of ruins, while he is a well-fed guest in a land of industrial infinity. The letter is a weapon, and it has already struck its target. The invasion they had promised to throw back had instead swept them away. It is February 1945. The arithmetic of victory has moved from the mess hall to the ledger. Steiner stands in a vast open field in Arkansas, but he is not digging trenches or laying minefields. He is picking cotton. Beside him, 1,000 other men in field grey, now stenciled with a large white PW, move through the bowls. This is the wage of the enemy. It is a tectonic shift in the status of a captive. Under the provisions of the Geneva Convention, the Americans are paying them. The micro perspective is the tactile reality of the scrip. Steiner reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small booklet of coupons. This is not the ersatz paper of a failing Reich. It is a currency backed by the industrial infinity of the United States. For every day of labor, whether in the cotton fields, the canning factories, or the camp laundries, Steiner earns 80 cents. In the mathematics of the plate, this is a fortune. It is a portal back to the PX, back to the fizzing sodas and the silver-wrapped Hershey bars. The macro perspective is a staggering display of industrial logic. While the German economy has collapsed into a systematic annihilation where women and children are forced into the factories under the shadow of the Gestapo, the American labor market is so robust it can incorporate nearly 400,000 enemy soldiers into its agricultural and industrial output. By 1945, POWs are performing millions of man-hours of labor, filling the vacuum left by 12 million American men who are overseas delivering the final argument of the 120mm gun. The Americans are not just feeding Steiner, they are making him a cog in the very machine that is crushing his homeland. This is the mathematics of defeat at its most cynical and efficient. Steiner realizes that his sweat is being converted into the very cotton that will become the uniforms of the GI soldiers, the bandages for their wounds, or the cordage for their parachutes. The arsenal of democracy is a closed-loop system of production that cannot be broken. It is a battlefield network that extends from the Arkansas soil to the Rhine River. A ghost haunts the cotton rows. Lieutenant Bauer, a former philosophy student from Heidelberg, his face sun-reddened and peeling, gestures with a handful of raw cotton. "Look at us," Bauer says. "We are the janitors of their abundance. They pay us in sugar and tobacco to help them win. And the worst part, Steiner, the worst part is that we want the coupons. We want the Hershey bars more than we want the victory of the Reich." This is the ideological collapse. The will of the soldier has been subverted by the industrial arithmetic of the canteen. Steiner walks toward the camp canteen at the end of the shift. He sees the glow of the HUD in the evening lights of the PX. Inside, the shelves are a material shock of choice. There are magazines, hair tonics, sewing kits, and endless rows of beer, 3.2% alcohol, near beer. But in the silence of ruins that is Germany, even this would be a miracle. Steiner trades a 10-cent coupon for a bottle. The glass is cold, the condensation a constellation of electricity in his palm. However, the realization of the disparity is the true calamity. While Steiner is earning a wage and drinking cold beer, his father in the Ruhr is likely scavenging for coal in the snow. The Americans have so much surplus that they can afford to pay their enemies a fair wage, ensuring a peaceful, productive, captive population. It is industrial logic defeating tactical brilliance. A well-paid prisoner does not riot, he works. He does not escape, he waits for the next shipment of lucky strikes. The smirk of the master race has been replaced by the focused, quiet greed of the consumer. Steiner looks at his script booklet. He has enough for a new pipe and a tin of velvet tobacco. The mathematics of defeat are final. He is no longer a warrior of the new order. He is a customer of the American dream, and the price of admission was the total destruction of his world. The invasion they had promised to throw back had instead swept them away. It is April 1945. The air in the camp theater is stagnant. A thick soup of recycled breath and the sharp metallic tang of the film projector's carbon arc lamp. Steiner sits in the darkness, his shoulder pressed against Hasso's, watching a beam of light cut through the gloom, a node in the world's first battlefield network of information. This is the cinematic collapse. The Americans have gathered the prisoners to witness the material shock of the liberation of the camps in the east, Buchenwald, Dachau, Nordhausen. On the screen, the micro-perspective is the sound of the film reel, a rhythmic mechanical clicking that sounds like the supersonic blade tips of a diving fighter. The mathematics of defeat takes a ghoulish, visceral form. Steiner sees the silence of ruins populated by the living dead. He sees pyramids of jerry cans replaced by pyramids of human remains. The industrial arithmetic of the Reich had been turned toward the systematic annihilation of its own soul. A logistics of death that stands in horrific contrast to the 4,000-calorie abundance of Steiner's Texas dinner. The macro perspective is the ideological collapse occurring in the room. Steiner hears the gasps, the muffled sobs, and the angry shouts of propaganda from the diehards in the front rows. But the industrial logic of the film is undeniable. The camera pans over warehouses filled with shoes, with gold teeth, with hair, a mythology of scarcity so profound that the Reich had to harvest its victims to sustain its attritional reality. Steiner looks down at his own boots, the high-quality leather he bought with his cotton picking scrip, and feels a wave of material shock so intense he fears he might vomit. This is the psychological autopsy. The Americans are not just showing them the crimes, they are showing them the failure of their will. While the US was building 500 cities for prisoners, the Reich was building factories for ash. The mathematics are laid bare. The American arsenal of democracy produced life and surplus, while the German New Order produced only a calamity of bone and soot. A ghost speaks in the dark, the voice of a young paratrooper named Dieter, who had always hummed the horsed vessel lied under his breath. Now Dieter is silent, his head buried in his hands. Dieter whispers, "We were told we were the bringers of civilization. We were told the Americans were the barbarians. But they have the bread, and we have the pits. They have the light, and we have the smoke. This is the tectonic shift." The smirk of the ideological warrior does not just fade, it undergoes a total systematic annihilation. The however pivot strikes Steiner with the force of a 120mm shell. What he did not know, what none of them knew, was that the same industrial capacity that created the Hershey bar and the Lucky Strike was the same capacity that allowed the Americans to document their victory with such clinical, undeniable precision. The mathematics of the plate and the mathematics of the grave are two sides of the same industrial coin. One side possessed the industrial logic to feed its enemies, while the other lacked the logic to even feed its own illusions. Steiner walks out of the theater into the blinding Texas sunlight. The world feels distorted, a calamity of perspective. He sees a guard eating an apple, casually tossing the core into the dust. To Steiner, that core represents more nutrition than the specters on the screen have seen in years. The industrial infinity of America is no longer a miracle to him, it is a judgment. The mathematics of defeat are complete. The war was not lost on the battlefield. It was lost in the soul of a machine that chose to produce death when its rival chose to produce an infinite, terrifying abundance of life. The invasion they had promised to throw back had instead swept them away. It is May 8, 1945. The tectonic shift has reached its final, trembling conclusion. Steiner stands in the center of the dusty Texas compound, his eyes fixed on the flag flying above the commandant's office. It has been lowered to half-mast, not for a German victory, but for the passing of an American president, and now the radio in the barracks is screaming the news of the calamity. The Reich is gone. The will that was supposed to last 1,000 years has dissolved into the silence of ruins in a mere 12 years. The macro perspective is a cold, industrial forensic analysis of the collapse. While the German leadership retreated into a distortion of reality in a bunker beneath Berlin, the American machine never faltered. The mathematics of defeat show that by this day the United States has produced 300,000 aircraft, 86,000 tanks, and 2.4 million trucks. But more importantly, it has maintained a surplus of 50 billion cigarettes and enough Hershey bars to pave the Autobahn. The ideological collapse is total, because the German soldier realized his tactical brilliance was being smothered by a material shock that did not even require the Americans to skip a meal. The micro perspective is the smirk of the guard, not a smirk of cruelty, but one of casual, terrifying indifference. The guard leans against the gate, eating an orange. He peels it slowly, the fizzing scent of the zest cutting through the dry prairie air. He tosses a segment to Steiner. To the guard, it is a piece of fruit. To Steiner, it is the final argument. The Reich collapsed because it could not move a train of coal 50 miles, yet the Americans could move a fresh orange 3,000 miles just to give a guard a snack. This is assembly line versus the will. Steiner realizes that German hubris was believing that the spirit of a soldier could overcome the industrial arithmetic of a continent-sized factory. He looks at his comrades. They are well fed, their skin clear, their lungs filled with blonde tobacco. They are the healthiest Germans on the planet, and they are so because of the industrial logic of their enemy. This is the psychological autopsy of a generation. They were seduced by a vision of power, only to be preserved by a vision of plenty. A ghost speaks. Siegfried, a former U-boat mechanic who spent the war dreaming of the grey wolves choking the American throat, stares at a stack of empty Coca-Cola crates. He says in a whisper, "We were trying to starve them. We thought if we sank enough ships they would quit. But for every ship we sank, they built 3. And they did not just fill them with shells, they filled them with this." He kicks a wooden crate. You cannot starve a ghost that has an infinite pantry. The pivot, however, is the most painful realization of all. What they did not know was that the abundance they enjoyed in the camps was not a gift. It was a demonstration of industrial infinity. The Americans did not treat them well because they liked them. They treated them well because they could. It was the ultimate flex of the arsenal of democracy. To feed an enemy 4,000 calories a day while his own family starves is a form of psychological warfare that no tactical brilliance can counter. Steiner looks at his hands. They are steady. He has gained 10 pounds since his capture at Falaise. He is a living monument to the mathematics of the plate, but inside there is only the silence of ruins. He knows that when he returns, he will be a stranger in a landscape of ash, a man who survived the calamity by eating the enemy's sugar. The ideological collapse is complete. The master race was fed by the decadent and found the decadents to be delicious. The mathematics have reached their sum. The will has been ground into metal confetti by the assembly line. Steiner turns away from the gate, the taste of the orange bitter on his tongue. He is a survivor of the arithmetic, but a victim of the reality. The invasion they had promised to throw back had instead swept them away. It is July 1946. The transition is not a homecoming, but a descent into the silence of ruins. Steiner stands on the deck of a transport ship once more, but the mathematics of the plate have been replaced by the arithmetic of the void. As the ship enters the port of Bremerhaven, the tectonic shift is complete. The towering, unbroken glass of New York is a hallucination. The reality is a jagged skyline of blackened rebar and metal confetti that used to be a civilization. The micro perspective is the weight of Steiner's duffel bag. Inside, tucked away like sacred relics, are the remnants of his material shock. 3 unopened Hershey bars, 2 packs of Lucky Strike cigarettes, and a small tin of coffee. He has guarded these items across the Atlantic as if they were the final argument of his survival. He steps off the gangplank and sees his father. The man is a ghost. He is a skeletal figure in a repurposed coat, his eyes deep in their sockets, reflecting the attritional reality of a nation that has been hollowed out from the inside. Steiner reaches into his bag and pulls out a Hershey bar. He watches his father's blackened fingers tremble as they touch the silver foil. The snap of the chocolate is the only sound in the ruined harbor. As the old man tastes the sugar, his eyes fill with a visceral terror. It is the terror of realizing how completely they were outclassed. This single ounce of chocolate is worth more than a month of labor in the new Germany. It is the mathematics of defeat distilled into a dark, sweet paste. The macro perspective is the industrial forensic analysis of the aftermath. The American arsenal of democracy has not stopped. It has simply pivoted. The same Liberty ships that carried tanks are now carrying grain, but the industrial logic remains the same. The Red Ball Express has been replaced by the Marshall Plan. Steiner looks around and sees the grass growing over bunkers and the memorial plaques already being fixed to the few standing walls. The systematic annihilation of the Reich's infrastructure is total, yet the American trucks, those same General Motors giants, are everywhere, delivering the calories that will keep the German people from total ideological collapse. The echo of the experience haunts Steiner for the rest of his life. He will never again look at a silver wrapper or smell the fizzing of a soda without feeling the calamity of his own hubris. He realizes that the war was not a tragedy of tactical brilliance versus numerical superiority. It was the mathematics of two different worlds. One world built a cult of personality and a landscape of frozen soil. The other built a mythology of abundance, so powerful it could afford to be merciful. Today, the sites of the Texas camps are mostly empty fields, the infrastructure of mercy long ago dismantled and sold for scrap. But if you walk the perimeter of Camp Hearn, you can still find the shards of glass, the thick green remnants of Coca-Cola bottles buried in the dirt. They are the fossils of an industrial infinity. They are the evidence of a material shock that broke the back of a dictatorship not just with lead, but with the terrifying, irresistible weight of surplus. Steiner's father finishes the chocolate, his face a mask of ideological collapse. He looks at his son, well-fed and strong, standing amidst the ruins. The mathematics have reached their sum, and the ledger is closed. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America. The invasion they had promised to throw back had instead swept them away.